Alright, welcome to the Oval Cog. Today we're getting into a 1971 CB360. So on these engines, they require a sealer on the base of the engine. We use Permatex Aviation grade sealant. Obviously it's not silicone based. We know the oil travels up and down these rods, and we want to make sure that the base is sealed well. We also want to apply the same sealant to the underside of the cylinder jug. And just a thin coat is all that's needed. And then we'll place our cylinder base gasket over. Obviously it's easier with two people. I got Greg holding the chains, the cam chain up for me, and we'll slide the gasket on. I'm going to apply a thin layer of oil on the inside of the cylinder jugs, so when you slide the rings on, that you have a slippery surface. They slide on a lot easier. We use Lucas Assembly lube to do that. You want to make sure that your piston rings are 120 degrees apart, and that the gap in the rings is not in line with each other, so they need to be separated by 120 degrees. So if you line them all up, you're going to end up getting blow by. So once you get the rings on, and you might have to wiggle that piston just a little bit and get them seated up in there. So we got the first one down. You might have to get under there with a small screwdriver and push the ring in a little bit. You want to be careful that you don't gouge your piston or your cylinder wall. Just press it in, give it a little wiggle, and once you get the rings up in there, you just give it a good push and it'll go down on top. See, in the bottom left on that cylinder is the cylinder dowel. Don't forget your dowels. Left side of the cylinder jug in the front. And this engine doesn't have rubber grommets that go around those dowels. The CB350, CB500 do, but this engine doesn't require that. This engine uses the sealer at the base to keep the oil where it belongs. So put your head gasket on and then slide your valve head on top of that. Make sure your dowels are lined up. Give it a good push. So if it doesn't fit together, obviously you don't want to force it. Next thing we'll do is apply our valve cover gasket, or I should say the cam housing gasket. So we'll apply our cam housing. So this is a four part top end on the CB360s, and once we get this cam on, if your chain doesn't reach around all the way, you might have to get a number 14 millimeter wrench and turn the crank just a little bit to get that chain in place. So we're going to spin the cam around until the dowel in the cam that the timing advancer slides on is straight up and down. So to time it, that dowel needs to be pointed directly up. There's also a line on the cam gear that needs to be parallel to the top of the cam head. So make sure those are lined up. Then we'll go down to the crank, and there's a LF and an LT. LF stands for left fire, which is a few degrees before left top. We want it on left top, or top dead center. So I'm having a problem focusing it, but once we get it focused here, you see a little groove in the coil there. and the LT mark needs to be lined up with that groove. And once that's in place, we know that the left piston is at top dead center. So we line up our cam, line up our crank, and then we'll put the chain around it. Now obviously you don't want to use an impact tool on engine assembly. We're just sandwiching this engine together so that we can get the cam chain around the gear. So I use some bolts. That's a little trick we use. Some nuts, I should say. Some large nuts to space out the top of the head. And then we'll crank that down, and then our cam chain will wrap around. So if you need to turn your cam, I use a screwdriver and very gently turn it into the right position. Just put your screwdriver in the teeth of the gear and do it gently. Obviously you don't want to mark anything. It might do well to put a piece of cloth between the engine and the screwdriver. Once the cam's lined up, the crank is lined up, then our chain is going to reach around, and we'll be able to, at this point, slide the master link in the chain. So one thing you might want to consider doing, well, obviously you want to double check your timing marks. You can see LT is at the groove, and our cam pin is straight up and down, and the mark on our cam gear is parallel to the top of the head. So we'll cut the plastic straps off our chain and slide the master link in, and ping the ends of the master link. I like to use a t-shirt around the top of the engine. You don't want to drop a part of that chain down in there. Fishing it out is very challenging. So alright, we'll put the last pieces on the engine. This is an oil director plate. Directs oil that ends up on top of the engine. Put a gasket on both sides of that, and then we'll put the engine top on. So there's 2 bolts on either side of the head. You want to make sure you tighten those down, and you tighten your head bolts down. The ones on the side go to work. So 7 on the sides and 14 on top. And obviously these bolts have to be torqued to spec and torqued in a specific order. And so we'll look at the book here and we'll give you the order. So 7 foot-pounds is 84 inch-pounds. So we'll use a little torque wrench to fit in there and torque them up to 84. Alright, the sequence on these head bolts are number 1, number 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. So that's the order you want to tighten these head bolts down to. I like to do 2 passes. The first pass I'll tighten down to 10 foot-pounds, and then the second pass 14 foot-pounds. And after you torque the top, you want to go and retorque the sides down to 7 foot-pounds. Obviously it's very important to tighten these in order and tighten them down to the proper specs. And that's it. That's a CB360 top-end engine build. Thanks for watching, and like and subscribe to the Oval Cog, and look for videos weekly.